Hello everybody, today we're going to read The Gammage Cup by Carol Candle. To Paul, The Gammage Cup. In the long far off of the land outside, brave Minipins lived, and some of them died. Lost are their treasures, buried deep, till the dry time came and the world was sand. The Minipins fled to a water land. Lost are their treasures, in the ground they sleep, and nobody knew that the Minipins went to the land of the river where they live content. Lost are their treasures, and the secret they keep, gummy and scribbles, collected works. It was quite untrue that the Minipins, or small ones, were a lost people, for they knew exactly where they were. They dwelt along the banks of the Watercress River in the land between the mountains, where they fished and tended their famous watercress beds, and grew their own peculiar reeds, which could be milled into flour, or used for thatching, or pulped into paper, or woven into cloaks, or moth-wing softness. It was a snug and secure valley, completely surrounded by unclimbable mountains, so perfectly made for stay-at-home, peace-loving Minipins, that it was no wonder they were to be found there. There was 12 villages in all, starting with Watersplash and the very head of the valley, where the freshets foamed down the cliffs of Old Snowdrift Mountain, and ending with Water Gap, where the waters of the river roared through the very heart of the craggy mountains known as Frostbite. It was through this tunnel in Frostbite, according to the legend, that the only remaining Minipins on Earth had traveled, under the leader Gammage, to reach the Green Valley in those old far-off days of the Great Dry Time. The river was mere muddy trickle then, like all the rivers of the land. It was said by Walter the Earl, who made a study of such things from a few old moldy parchments in his possession, that the Minipins were running for their lives for a savage band known as Mushrooms, or the Hairless Ones. When they entered the long tunnel, yanking their two-wheeled carts after them, they were only saved from being splitted and roasted from the Mushrooms' dinner by a miraculous rain, which filled the river after they had come through the tunnel and washed out their pursuers. Once the river closed the underground passage, there was no way in or out of the land between the mountains, except for high flying birds, and Foley the balloonist, of course, but Foley came along sometime later, and Foley was special. One of the 12 villages was Slipper on the Water, which got its name, so the legend went on, when those first Minipins paddled their rudely made boats up the watercress to explore their new valley. It was at this spot that Gammage lost his left slipper overboard. For 3 days and 3 nights, it floated on the water in the self-same spot, never moving with the current. Clearly, this was a symbol not to be ignored, so it was that 10 of the Minipins never got to the head of the valley at all. They stayed at Slipper on the Water, building their cottage of the river clay and reed thatch, establishing their watercress beds, and raising their small families. But before Gammage and the others traveled on to found other villages along the watercress, each of the 10 drank deeply from the precious cup of wisdom that Gammage carried wrapped in silk and slung over his shoulder. So much and no more was known of the far past, for no real records had been kept during the early ages. At least none had ever been discovered, though Walter the Earl was convinced that they existed. Several fragments of ancient parchments hinted. He said nobody else could decipher the old writing of treasures buried in the village, possibly in his own garden. His cottage had the oldest foundation of any in Slipper of the Water, and was believed to have been the first meeting house in the village. So Walter the Earl dug up his garden and probed at the walls of his house in search of ancient scrolls and treasure, and occasionally buttonholed folks to talk about historical facts, while more sensible Minipins worked at their practical jobs and, when they thought of Walter the Earl at all, considered him a dry old bore. Now in this year of gammage 880, through Slipper on the Water had the usual river clay cottage with reed thatch, lived in by the usual Minipins and Minipin children. It was by no means an ordinary village. For one thing, there were those few villagers known as the periods. Periods were special. Everyone agreed to that. Not only did they have a special way of spelling their names, but they were a special air of dignity, and of course, they held most of the village offices. It had been this way in Slipper on the Water ever since the time of Foley. The balloonists for the periods were descendants of Foley, and that explained everything as far as the villagers were concerned. It was just 440 years ago that Foley, afterward known as Foley the Magnificent or the Great Foley, had sailed away over the cliffs of Snowdrift in a balloon of reed silk and woven below. The first, last, and only balloon ever constructed in the land between the mountains. Even more miraculous to ground-loving Minipins, he had sailed back just 129 days later, bringing with him a case full of curiosities from the land between the mountains. But as though to underline the moral that Minipins were meant to stay at home, the balloon contraption had burst when he landed, scalding its contents, including Foley, over several Minipins' acres of ground. When Foley was picked up, he had no recollection of what he had seen in the land beyond the mountains. If it hadn't been for the curiosity and the queer book he has filled with notes, Foley would in time have become a misty legend, and Slipper on the Water only numbered 10 of the 12 very ordinary Minipin villages spread along the bank of the watercress. But as it was, the period's descendants of the long-ago adventure were special. Though Minipins in general never strayed far from their homes, always expecting the mayors of the village, who once a year made the long trip to Watersplash for the big meeting. The fame of these descendants had gone up and down the valley. Periods were like that, but it wasn't only the periods who made the Slipper on the Water different. There were 3 Minipins in the village who were usually referred to by their neighbors as them. They were not considered respectable. They were a law among themselves. They lived alone instead of marrying and raising families, as normal Minipins did. Worst of all, they flaunted cloaks as such an outlandish hue that it was shaming to be seen talking to them. Furthermore, the thems didn't properly work at anything. Walter the Earl spent his time digging holes in the ground in his ridiculous search for his hidden treasure. Curly Green was usually to be seen sitting on her stool in the corner of the marketplace, blobbling pictures onto stretched reed paper. And Gummy was Bonidal. Gummy was never seen doing anything but wearing a dreamy look along with his sun-colored cloak and peaked hat. He disappeared for hours at a time in his tiny boat. But where he went and what he did, nobody knew, though there were rumors aplenty. Only 2 things were surely known about Gummy. He was over-fond of childish pranks, and he made rhymes, not proper poems, such as the one brought back by Foley, now hanging in the museum, but scribbles, nonsense rhymes about rains and birds and flowers and the wind. They bubbled out of him as water bubbles from a spring. Then, of course, there was Muggles. Muggles couldn't be called one of them exactly, but she wasn't just an ordinary villager either. While it was true that she dutifully wore that Minipin green cloak and brown weave dress, it cannot be denied that upon occasion she tied up her middle with a vivid orange sash. Besides being the caretaker of the Foley curiosities in the museum, she was a candy maker, which was a good, steady sort of things to be. But on the other hand, she distressed the tidy Minnetonka housewives by keeping her house in a deplorable muddle. She was a collector of odds and ends and bits and pieces, another good trait, but they overflowed her tiny cottage until it was next to impossible to step inside, and that was disgraceful. There had been complaints, of course, and only last year the mayor himself had begged her to tidy up, like a good Minipin. Ever anxious to please, Muggles had tried hard, but the more she put away, the less able was she to find anything. Gradually, the articles she had neatly folded into cupboards slipped back into their old places on the floor. Closets disgorged their precious pile of oddments, and drawers leaked their contents until once more Muggles knew exactly where everything was. So Muggles was something of a trial to slipper on the water, but it was agreed that there was no real harm in her. She was always ready to oblige, always in a good humor. And if she was a little simple-minded, why she could hardly be blamed for that. Being simple-minded never interfered with her candy recipes or the job she had been given at the museum. The museum! Muggle awoke with a panicky feeling that she had overslept. She shot out of bed like a servicing trout and then stood blinking in the chill half-light of her little room. How very odd, she thought, in her sleep-fogged mind. How very odd that it is still dark. What can have happened to the sun? Groping her way to the window, which overlooked the marketplace, she peered anxiously through the slatted reed shade. There had been rain during the night, for the cobblestones gleamed wet in the dim flare of the reed light, still burning fitfully in the center of the marketplace. But why was the sun so late in appearing today of all days, when the mayor was coming home from a big meeting, still convinced that she had overslept? Muggles stood winking and blinking at the deserted cobblestones. Where had everybody got to? Why wasn't the square full of green cloaked figures, hustling and bustling about to make ready for the mayor's return? Then with a sigh of relief, she saw a line of golden fire on top of the Sunset Mountains in the west. Why, the sun must be just rising, only there was something wrong about that too, wasn't there? Suddenly, she heard the pat-pat of soft woven slippers of the cobblestones of the square. Rubbing her blurred eyes, she made out the figure of Gummy, one of them. He was coming from the street, going to the river and stumbling across the marketplace as though he had just got off a dizzy swing at the fun fair. His yellow cloak drooped from his shoulders, and his peaked hat looked wilted. In the middle of the marketplace, he stopped and stared up at the orange fire on the mountains for several moments before he staggered on. Muggles watched him going towards his shabby cottage. Then he stopped again and veered to the right. A moment later, he had gone into Walter the Earl's house. Muggles blinked and stared and blinked again. Odder and odder, the reed light continued to flicker, casting its weird shadows over the cottage, around the square, and the 4 public buildings in the center. The door through which Gummy had gone opened once more, and he came out, this time accompanied by Walter the Earl, his gold-embroidered cloak slung across his shoulders. They both looked up at the Sunset Mountains, but now the fire had disappeared. While Muggles was pondering this further oddity, Gummy and Walter the Earl moved back toward Walter the Earl's house, where they spent some minutes inspecting the mounds of earth and the garden. Finally, Gummy trudged off to his cottage, and Walter the Earl picked up a spade and plunged it into the ground in a spot close up to the house itself. and still the reed light flickered early over the wet cobblestones of the empty marketplace. Muggle stumbled back to her bed, struggling to make sense out of this very queer morning. It was not until her feet grew toasty warm under the comforter that the explanation occurred to her. What a ninny I am, she thought with a drowsy laugh. It's not the sun that's late, it's me that's early. I was having a dream. I might have known when I saw the sun rising in the west that it was a dream. But what a queer dream to have, and it seemed so real. Yawning mightily, she snuggled deeper into her feather bed and let sleep creep back into her body. Meanwhile, the sun rose quite properly from behind the sunrise mountain in the east, dispelling the light mist in the valley. The lamplighter extinguished the reed light, sniffing hungrily at the yeasty aroma from loaf the baker's oven, and the village stirred into life. When the sun's rays finally touched Muggle's face, her eyes snapped open like window blinds suddenly released. She had overslept. There had been a sort of dream about oversleeping, she remembered fuzzily, and now she had really done it. Biting of a yawn, she floundered out of jumble of comforters and pillows, and began reaching here and there for her clothes, which she always left for convenience sake on the floor. There was no time for a bath, which was just as well, since her little yet found there were a permanent keeping place, a place for everything, and the more things in the place, the better. Muggles murmured to herself, for there was nobody else to talk to. She paused in her dressing operation to cast a sharp glance around the room, just to reassure herself that nothing had leaped out of one pile into another during the night, but all was in perfect order, neat and tidy, the way she liked it. The far corner pile, the hearthstone pile, the under-the-table pile. Muggle came to with a start. Idle dreamers have nothing to put in the pot, she told herself sharply. But she had a curious feeling that today was different from other days, that the very air she breathed was full of a strange excitement. That something not altogether pleasant was about to happen. Nonsense, she scoffed, reaching for her slipper. There will be strange excitement, not altogether pleasant. Indeed, if I don't get over to that museum pretty soon. And the mirror coming home and all. She slipped her fat little feet into her slippers and gave the points on the toes a jerk to make them stand upright. It's what comes of dreaming silly dreams about suns coming up in the west where there's no right to be. That's all. Next, I'll be dreaming there of real fires on the sunset mountains, and then where will we all be? She struggled into her brown weave dress and looked around for her brown sash, but it had somehow lost itself. No matter, today was a special day, with the mayor coming home from Water Splash. Okay, I'll read here for today, and then next time I'll read from it to about, maybe next time I will read until, oh my gosh, there's so much. Did I skip some pages? Okay, I'll read until chapter 1 ends. Thank you. Bye.